Welcome back to Freedom Fridays. In this episode of Freedom Fridays, we are going to take a look at the upcoming elections in Michigan and see where some of those things stand biblically and where they stand in integrity and such. So we're going to just deal with a few things. We only have roughly 20 minutes here, so we're not going to be able to go through everything that we did on Sunday in our church. And you can take a look at our website, lbconline.org, for that information if you would like. And no, I did not tell you which candidate to vote for, but I told you which issues are biblical issues. And those issues include, like we talked about in the last couple of podcasts, abortion is definitely a major biblical issue. Life in general, life is granted by God. It is not granted by right in a document, whether that be a constitution or a law or elsewhere. All of our rights, our inalienable rights, are granted by God and not by human beings. And so the Bible, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, has a lot to say about things like life issues, abortion, and such. And so anything having to do with abortion is, if it supports it, it's evil. And any candidate that supports abortion is erring on the evil side, at the very least. And if they're a whole out proponent and pushing abortion, then I would say that they are acting evilly as well. And we do see a lot of that. That issue is one of the major issues to determine whether a candidate stands for biblical issues or not. For the vast majority of candidates that stand for abortion, notice I'm not saying pro-choice, because pro-choice is a misnomer. It does not give any choice to the baby. It's pro-death. It's pro-abortion is what it is. And anyone who stands on that side of the table, when you look at the rest of their stands, most of them are against biblical issues. Not every single candidate, but the vast majority of them do not stand with us on biblical issues at all. And so abortion is definitely a major topic to discuss and when looking at candidates. Also, it's interesting. It seems like there's a fight for sexuality nowadays. Abortion is part of that fight. Part of that fight is homosexuality, as that has become more and more rampant and more accepted. And some people are, say, well, the Bible never says anything about homosexuality. Excuse me? Then you haven't read the Bible, because it's very clear in the law, in the Old Testament, that homosexuality is abhorrent to God. It's also, you say, well, that's Old Testament. Fine. In the New Testament, there are a lot of lists by the Apostle Paul that say, these sorts of people are not going to be in heaven, people who live lives dedicated to these things, and homosexuality is in most of those lists. As well as going to Romans chapter 1, finding out that homosexuality is the result of God giving us over to a depraved and debased mindset because we chose in our rebellion to deny Him. And so it's obvious by Scripture that homosexuality is not God's design. God's design is, as Jesus affirmed in the Old Testament, in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, God's design is that man and woman are separate and to be joined in marriage, and the two will become one flesh. And Jesus reiterates that in Mark chapter 10, where he says to the Pharisees, as they're trying to talk about divorce, He says in verse 6, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Verse 7, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. Verse 8, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. Speaking specifically on the divorce issue, but also affirming the design of God in the Old Testament, that he made us male and female. There are only two genders. Biologically, it's not a debate. If you look in science, and it's interesting that the same group that has been touting follow the science, follow the science, follow the science, in this issue doesn't talk anything about science. Why? Because they're only talking about emotions. They're talking about your identity, what you decide you want to identify as. Because if you look at the science, it's 100% certain that there are two genders, two sexes, two genders. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, not like the way they've tried to change things up to try and confuse everyone. Biblically, there are two genders, and sexuality is defined by God. We are accountable to our Creator, and it's up to Him as to how He wants us to act. And so He defined right from the beginning, sexuality is to be between a man and a woman, and it is for the purpose of bringing godly offspring to Him. It's for the purpose of populating the earth. And it is for the purpose of joining the two together into one flesh. And it cannot be accomplished in any other manner than one man and one woman. That's how sexuality is defined by God. And if you want to define it as two men, well, you cannot accomplish the procreation portion of that at all. You can't accomplish any of it, because that's homosexuality. It's a sin. It's a grievous thing to God. Same thing with two women. And if you decide, well, today I feel like a man, or today I feel like a woman, or today I feel like a monkey. It doesn't matter what you feel. When did facts cave to feelings? I'm sorry, but your feelings really have nothing to do with the matter of whether you are a man or a woman, a boy or a girl. That is clearly a biological thing that God has designed. And again, if you say, well, I should have been a man, or I should have been a woman, but I'm not, then you are in essence saying you don't agree with God because you think He made a mistake somehow. And He makes no mistakes. So those gender and sexuality issues are definitely biblical issues. And when we look at the candidates, those things tend to separate candidates wide as to the ones who want to hold to the tradition, not just tradition, but the tradition of following biblical design. And the other ones want to then throw out biblical design. And so any candidate that stands for abortion, any candidate that stands for transsexual relationships, any candidate that stands for homosexual relationships is not a candidate that's endorsed by God. I'm just going to flat out say that. That's a huge difference, by the way. In our gubernatorial election, you see a major, vast shift between the two candidates. In fact, Governor Whitmer's campaign even pushes on Tudor Dixon's position that abortion shouldn't be allowed at all, which is a biblical position, by the way. And they think that's a big issue, that she doesn't have any exceptions to it. The exceptions for rape and incest, by the way, are smokescreen, a straw man. First of all, they're less than 0.1% of any situation. It's not happening. It's just very rare. Secondly, who said that if a horrible act of rape happens that you punish the child for it. And thirdly, as we talked about last week, the irony is these evil people who are pushing Proposal 3, which is abortion on demand at any time, kill any baby you want, whenever you want, is almost as bad as California's up to 28 days after birth rule. The same people who are pushing that, which will also legalize the incest, are the ones that say there should be an exception for incest. So which is it? Are you going to legalize incest, or are you going to have an exception for incest? They're really talking out of both sides of their mouth. Either way, why punish the baby for what somebody else did? Punish the perpetrator. The scripture is very clear that a man is punished for his own sin, not the sins of others. So where do some of these things stand? I told you where our gubernatorial candidates stand. Governor Whitmer stands wholesale for all of the things that we stand against, as far as the things that we've just discussed. Tudor Dixon, on the other hand, stands for a traditional definition of marriage, traditional definition of life, and wants to support life. And so there is a clear distinction between the two there. Now let's take a look quickly at the proposals 1 and 2. We talked about proposal 3 last time. So what is proposal 1? And I would caution you, anytime you read these proposals, the people who put the proposal forward want you to vote for it. They are not going to give you the answers as to why you should not vote for it. You've got to look deeper. Here's the official ballot wording for proposal 2, or proposal 1, excuse me. This is a proposal to amend the state constitution to require annual public financial disclosure reports by legislatures and other state officers, and change state legislator term limit to 12 total years in legislature. The proposed constitutional amendment would require members of legislature, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and attorney general file annual public financial disclosure reports after 2023, including assets, liabilities, income sources, future employment agreements, gifts, travel reimbursements, and positions held in organizations except religious, social, and political organizations. Secondly, would require legislature implement but not limit or restrict reporting requirements. And thirdly, replace current term limits for state representatives and state senators with a 12-year term limit in any combination between House and Senate, except that the person elected to Senate in 2022 may be elected the number of times allowed when that person became a candidate. So, what is the issue here? There's really two things, and it's unfortunate that we have one proposal for two very separate things. Because personally, I would like to vote yes on one of the things and no on the other thing. And so what we've got here is somebody who pushed it together to try and ram something through. They're promoting this as the financial disclosures. It's titled term limits, which sounds like a great thing. In 1992, I believe it was, term limits were established in Michigan, where we have up to 3 two-year terms in the House, the state House, and up to 2 four-year terms in the state Senate. So right now, you could get up to 14 years if you served in both. And they say, well, this one is limiting it to 12. However, when you look at the actual statistics, the amount of people that would be affected by this, the vast majority of them, it would allow them to run again because they're not serving in both House and Senate. They're serving in one side. It would allow the 12-year total to be 12-year anywhere. So you could have 12 years in the Senate or 12 years in the House or 12 years combined. This would change the House from 6 years to 12 years potentially. It would change the Senate from 8 years to 12 years potentially. I'm not sure personally that that's a good idea. You decide that on your own. The second portion of it, which is said first, is about financial accountability. That's a good thing. There are many states, I believe there's 15 states already that have this. It's a good thing to be accountable for your finances when you're a government official. What are you going to do? What are you doing? Whose money are you taking in order to vote the way you're voting? Because there's a lot of corruption. It's unfortunate that we have to look at things like this, but that part is a good thing. So we've got a good thing and a not. You decide whether you want the politicians in longer or not. Coupled together, unfortunately, they threw those two things together. Now, Proposal 2 is about elections. Again, we talked about Proposal 3, and Proposal 3 is all about abortion on demand. Please, I urge you, vote no on Proposal 3. Proposal 2 says a proposal to amend the state constitution to add provisions regarding elections. This proposed constitutional amendment would 1. Recognize fundamental right to vote without harassing conduct. 2. Require military or overseas ballots be counted if postmarked by Election Day. 3. Provide voter right to verify identity with photo ID or signed statement. 4. Provide voter right to single application to vote absentee in all elections. 5. Require state-funded absentee ballot drop boxes and postage for absentee applications and ballots. 6. Provide that only election officials may conduct post-election audits. 7. Require 9 days of early in-person voting. 8. Allow donations to fund elections which must be disclosed. And 9. Require canvass boards certify election results based only on the official records of votes cast. And there's a whole host of other words behind this that you can take a look at the full text. Now I'm going to go through some issues here. Notice the wording. They are very deceptive in their wording. Basically, this is going to open up what we had in 2020, where they made a lot of provisions for COVID, and they wide opened up mail-in voting. They're trying to do that again. One of the big issues that's a problem here is you've got state-funded absentee ballot drop boxes, which have to be for every 15,000 people in a municipality, I believe, it says you have to have a drop box. So now they're going to be everywhere. And when you look back at the history of the drop boxes last time, on the last election, they only increased election fraud. So that's not a good thing. The state's now having to pay your postage to send it back. They're saying people can't afford to send their ballots back. If you can't afford, less than $1 to send your ballot back, then your priorities are really wrong on your voting. If you're voting absentee, it says recognize a fundamental right to vote without harassing conduct. We already have that, folks. You can already vote. You have the right to vote. The harassing conduct is not an issue. It's already, you can't harass people while they're voting. Require military or overseas ballots to be counted if postmarked by Election Day. Military ballots, that's great. Now they're adding overseas. And that, again, look at the wording. Where are these overseas ballots coming from? Are they potentially people who are not living here full time? Then why are they voting here full time? Provide a voter right to verify identity with photo ID or signed document. This is extremely deceptive wording. It doesn't have anything to do with providing the right to a photo ID, to vote by photo ID. Nobody is denying that would be a really good thing. I'm not denying that at all. I think you should have photo IDs to vote. That should be a requirement. But notice it says, or signed statement. Anybody can sign a statement saying, yep, I'm that person. That's all they have to do in order to vote with that name. That's not right. And that doesn't prove citizenship, which is a requirement to vote. Neither does the new provision in here to automatically get a voter identification card when you get a driver's license. Folks, you don't need to be a citizen to get a driver's license. My wife had a driver's license in the state of Michigan before she was a citizen of the United States. She was still only a citizen of Canada. And so that is going to provide for potential fraud as well. This one's really concerning. Provide voter right to single application to vote absentee in all elections. That's not all elections in this current cycle. That's all elections ever. So now if I ask for a voter absentee ballot and I check that box, they're going to continue to send me absentee ballots every election. And you say, well, that's great. I don't have to hassle with it and everything. Yeah, well, what if you move and they keep sending you ballots? What if you move out of state and now Michigan keeps sending you ballots to the old address? This is asking for or somebody dies and now they keep getting a ballot. We have enough dead people voting. We don't need more. This is just asking for fraud. Provide that only election officials may conduct post-election audits. What are they trying to hide? When you limit that to only election officials, you look back at the election 2 years ago, and all the election officials were parroting the same wording. They were the same thing. They weren't wanting any scrutiny. When you limit scrutiny, you've got something to hide. And this is looking like they've got something to hide. Require 9 days of early in-person voting. Don't really have a dog in that fight other than that's going to cost a whale of a lot of money. Now you're going to have to pay people for the polls for 10 days instead of just one. That's going to cost us a lot of money. Our state can't afford that. Allow donations to fund elections, which must be disclosed. They're allowing private companies, private nonprofits, private organizations to fund elections now. I thought this was a public thing. And so that's definitely going to swing things in whatever direction they want. And require canvass boards certify election results based only on the official records of vote cast. Now that sounds good. The official record, though, then cannot be questioned because they're only allowing election officials to conduct post-election audits. So now you add those two things together and they're just taking away all of their accountability. That's what they're trying to do. Again, please, if you value anything in election integrity, which I would hope that you want things to be up front and above board, then the way to keep things up front and above board on this one is to vote no. So we've got no on 2, no on 3. Decide what you want on the term limits and on the financial accountability. I think the financial accountability is a great idea. The term limits, I'm not sure is such a good idea. So, vote how you want on that. I'm not telling you how you have to vote. I'm telling you how I would vote and how I'm urging you to vote in my podcast. And you say, well, you can't do that. Yes, I can. I have the right just like any other citizen to plead with anybody in my podcast. So again, when you go to the polls, please be informed. Vote biblically for the candidates. Do not vote for a candidate that stands for abortion. That is an anti-moral issue. Do not vote for a candidate that stands for immoral gender classifications and sexuality. That's immoral as well, and that's going to make it pretty clear who you should vote for. And so thank you for tuning in. We will see you next week as we dig back into the scriptures on Freedom Fridays.